When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from, I don't know how long this is taking. Is this taking them, again, is it a week, a month, a day, a year? I don't know. I don't know how long this is taking them. But they have decided to go and meet with him. When they saw him from a distance, remember, he's an outcast now. So he is probably sitting somewhere out in the wilderness or out in the edge of town or some area where the outcasts go. He, as a leper or as someone with a horrible skin disease, he would not be welcome in society. So he's on the fringes now. Wherever he is not going to be with the rest of the people in town. So when they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. I guess that's how ugly he was, with all these sores and boils on his body. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. These are all, of course, signs of mourning. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was. This is the best they will do, by the way, as comforters for Job in the book. This first paragraph, where they first appear, is their best moment. Everything coming after this is going to be all downhill for these guys. They had the right reaction at first. They wanted to sympathize with him. They wanted to meet together, go and meet him and comfort him. And when they did, they expressed signs of mourning for him, and then they sat with him in silence. But from the time they start speaking and all the way to the end, things are going to get worse. They're not going to stay this. They're not going to remain good comforters as time goes on. So after this 7, so we know the whole thing is taking place over the span of at least these 7 days. Okay, I don't know how much time is passing between these various events. Okay, from Job 1:6, when one day the angels came, to Job 1:13, when one day all this stuff happened. And then Job 2:1, another day the angels came again. And then Job gets the sores. And then the friends get together and go, I don't know how long that's taking place over. But I do know that these 4 guys are all, and apparently there was a 5th guy too that doesn't get mentioned here until later on, are all sitting together somewhere out in the desert or the wilderness or on the outskirts of town for a week in silence as Job suffers and they mourn for him. That at least we have a time frame for. Everything else, who knows? I mean, really, who knows? So after this week of silence, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Not God, but the day of his birth. He said. So here we go. Here we go. This is what we're going to be doing now for the next 40 chapters. We're going to be having characters talk. There's going to be, I think a lot of people are familiar with Job 1 and Job 2. But I don't know how familiar a lot of people are with Job 3 through, was it 38, 39? $37 actually. 38 is when God starts speaking. So we now have got Job's chapter 3 through 37 of just talking. We got 35 chapters in front of us now of just these characters talking. And the argument is going to go in circles, almost from the very beginning. They're just going to be saying the same thing over and over, almost from the very start. So you've got 37 chapters of the characters basically saying the same things over and over. I don't know how much familiarity people have with this section of Job, because I've got a pretty good feeling that most people don't read this section of Job. But here we go. So, Job has opened his mouth and is cursing the day of his birth. He said, "May the day of my birth perish. In the night it was said, a boy is born. That day may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it. May darkness and deep shadow claim it once more, or the shadow of death. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm its light. That night, may thick darkness seize it. May it not be included amongst the days of the year, nor be entered in any of the months, and not be part of the calendar. May that night be barren. May no shout of joy be heard in it. May those who curse days... Now, cursing was a big deal back in their culture, okay? I think before we go any further, we should probably stop to consider how prominent the act or art of cursing was. Remember, we read about Balak, the king of Moab, hiring this guy Balaam, the prophet, to come and curse Israel for him when Israel was about to attack him. Balaam was a prophet for hire, apparently, who had a reputation for uttering successful curses. The religious texts of the nations around Israel had these curses. In the covenant that God makes with Abraham, with Moses, there are blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. So the idea of we call these now the execration texts. You would curse your enemies. Egypt had rituals where they would curse their enemies. They all did. They had rituals where they would curse their enemies. This is very, 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 very common. The idea of cursing something or someone, even the whole idea of Satan and God wagering over whether or not Job would curse God. Okay, it's like that idea of cursing. When you think of cursing, you think of just using curse words. And there may have been something of an equivalent of that in their culture. They may have had certain words they use in a curse context that were, flagrant and not appropriate to use in other contexts, maybe. But when they talk about cursing, they're talking more about, literally, may this day never be, or may the sun never shine on your head, or something like that. Like some sort of, may you be defeated and destroyed utterly, sort of thing. It's like, may this enemy party, may this thing that is my enemy, whether it's an enemy nation, or just an enemy neighbor, or an enemy, like in this case, he's cursing the day of his birth. Like, may that be cursed. May that day be black. May it be gone. May it be stricken from the books. May it be forgotten. May those who curse days or curse the sea curse that day. So again, there are people whose jobs have been professionally to curse people. We read about Balaam being a prophet for hire who was summoned by the king of Moab to curse Israel and couldn't do it. There would have been people out there whose entire job would have been to lay curses on people. May those who are ready to rouse Leviathan. Now, we're going to mention this Leviathan thing later on, by the way. Well, actually, you know what? We should probably mention it now. Leviathan is a mythological concept. Job here is tapping into the belief systems of the people around him, and Job himself may believe this too. Job wasn't an Israelite. He was an Edomite. So there is some room for Job's cosmology to be incorrect and still the scriptures to be inerrant. I know we know today that there was never a giant sea creature called Leviathan. Okay, we know that. So it is very hard for some of us today to believe that the scriptures talk about this gigantic sea monster, Leviathan, which we know never existed. Okay? Leviathan here is a reference to a mythological creature that terrified the people of the world at this time, which was a sea monster. Now, I believe probably what likely happens at the origin of this mythological creature, Leviathan, is probably that the sea was very scary, and the creatures in the sea were very scary. Okay? We can see glimpses of them when we get out on our boats and travel the Mediterranean Sea or whatever, because that's what they would have been traveling at this point in time, in the Mediterranean Sea. And you can see glimpses of them, like when whales surface and shoot their air out of their blowholes, or giant squids. There were stories. Now, you might have to get out farther into the ocean for that. But the stories of the Kraken that would be common in European culture later on. Again, you might have to go out closer to the ocean to find squids. I'm not sure if they went to the Mediterranean Sea. And that's what the Kraken was probably based on, stories of giant squids. It is, you know, the sea is scary, and the creatures that live in the sea are scary. You know, and so for sailors, for centuries upon centuries upon centuries, would have these stories of these monsters in the sea that they would occasionally catch glimpses of, as these giant whales and squids and other scary looking creatures would come near the surface from time to time for whatever the reason. And I think over the years, and this is early in history, I mean this goes back to Abraham's day or before, these stories were already taking shape in the form of these sea monsters, Leviathan. You know, it was very common in the mythologies of the cultures around Israel, which Edom would have been one of them, you know, that Job was an Edomite, to have these stories of God or the gods making the current world out of the body of a dead sea monster that they slew in battle to create the world. Genesis 1 even has this idea specifically. There's a specific focus in Genesis 1 talking about how these sea monsters were all made by God. God did not fight a sea monster to make the world. In fact, all the creatures in the sea were made by him to begin with. God himself is going to finish off. The book of Job actually climaxes with God talking about Leviathan and going on and on and on about how mighty Leviathan is. So this idea is Leviathan represents this idea of this gigantic, you know, monster in the sea that people are imagining or envisioning based on what little they can see of the creatures in the sea. And they're telling these stories about God defeating these monsters to help console themselves as they go out on the sea and they're scared about these creatures that could come and get them. And that's where Leviathan comes from. We know there really was no creature called Leviathan. Like, there is no seven-headed sea serpent, you know, that we just, you know, we know that, okay? So it's tough for some of us today to wrap our heads around Scripture seemingly endorsing this idea of Leviathan, which is why some people will try to tell you that Leviathan is just a crocodile or something like that. Well, that's not the case. That's trying to limit Leviathan to being like a crocodile or even a known animal at all is defeating the purpose. It's going against the point, and you're misreading really the entire meaning of the book of Job in the end. And it's okay to say that Leviathan doesn't actually exist. It's okay to say that. All right, that doesn't harm our belief in the Bible as the Word of God to say that Leviathan is not a real creature. It never was a real creature. That's okay. It's okay to say that. So anyway, so Job is already talking about Leviathan here. So we need to kind of establish in our minds like what the background idea of that is. May those who curse days curse that day. Those who are ready curse the sea, because Leviathan of course comes from the sea. Curse that day. Those who are ready to arouse Leviathan. May its morning stars become dark. May it wait for daylight in vain, and not see the first rays of dawn. For it did not shut the doors on the womb of the womb on me to hide trouble from my eyes. So he's basically saying now he wished he had died in labor. Why did I not perish at birth, and die as I came from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me? You take a baby out and put him on your knees, basically, I guess. And breasts that I might be nursed. For now I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest. I wouldn't know all these troubles. If I had just died as an infant, I wouldn't know about all these hardships. I wouldn't know about all this pain and suffering. Oh, how wonderful that would be. I would be asleep and at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, who built for themselves places that are now lying in ruins, with rulers who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. So everyone dies, even the rulers, even the mighty men die. Or why was I not hidden in the ground like a stillborn child, like an infant who never saw the light of day? Now, he's not thinking about what his mother has to say about this, or his father. He's not thinking about what the effects of him dying as an infant would be on other people. He's only thinking about his own pain here. Why was I not hidden in the ground like a stillborn child, like an infant who never saw the light of day? There the wicked cease from turmoil, and there the weary are at rest. Captives also enjoy their ease. They no longer hear the slave drivers shout. Slaves were basically people who were defeated in warfare. At this point in time, that's pretty much what a slave was. You went to war against the nation because you needed to take them as slaves. Israel even used some of the neighbors they subjugated as forced laborers. So in death, the captives and the slaves can enjoy their ease. They no longer have to be whipped and yelled at by their slave drivers. The small and the great are there, and the slave is freed from his master. It sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? Job is longing for the sweet, blissful embrace of death. He wishes it happened to him before. Why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul? To those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than for hidden treasure. So Job wants to die. In fact, apparently he's been longing for death for a while now. He's searching for it more than he searches for hidden treasure. Who are filled with gladness and rejoice when they reach the grave. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For sighing comes to me instead of food. Groaning. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. So he had a feeling that this was going to happen. Way back at the beginning of the book, it said early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of his children, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. So somewhere in the back of his mind, apparently he was always afraid that something was going to happen. Maybe he always thought that someday God would take everything he had away from him. Maybe he thought that. Maybe he always had that inner fear in him. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. That is Job's opening lament of the book. Then someone is going to respond to him, and then Job is going to respond to that person, and then another. So there's three guys here with him. And now Job has given so they were silent until Job spoke. Job has now spoken, which gives permission to the other guys to speak. So the next thing is going to happen here is Eliphaz, the leader kind of these three guys, is going to respond to what Job just said. And then Job is going to respond to what Eliphaz said. And then Bildad is going to respond to what Job said. And then Job is going to respond to what Bildad said. And then Zophar is going to respond to what Job said. And Job is going to respond to what Zophar says. That's going to happen 3 separate times. They're going to have 3 series of speeches like this, where one guy says something in response to Job. So Job starts it off here with this lament. That's his opening lament right there. So the next thing that's going to happen is Eliphaz is going to respond to that, and Job is going to respond to Eliphaz, and it's going to start this cycle of each guy saying something, and Job responding to that guy, and the next guy on the list saying something. It's always going to go in that order. It's going to go Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. It's going to happen 3 separate times. Eliphaz is the rationalist. He's the one who's going to be trying to rationalize his way through this process. Bildad is acting as God's defense attorney. He's going to be the one advocating for God's faithfulness and holiness more than anything else. And Zophar is going to be Job's prosecuting attorney. Zophar is going to be the one who's going to be the most direct in accusing Job of having hidden sin in his life. The argument that all 3 of them are ultimately going to have is that Job brought this upon himself in some way. Job even kind of indicates it here that he feared something was going to happen. We read about at the beginning that he would offer these sacrifices on behalf of his children in case they had some sort of sin that he didn't know about. So apparently Job had this hidden thought in his mind for some time that maybe something bad's going to happen to me someday. And so the three guys are going to all ultimately take the stance that, yes, Job or his kids did have something bad going on, and this is happening to him as a direct retribution for that. And Job's stance is going to be, no, I did not have anything going on in my life. I did not have any hidden sin that I was aware of that merits this sort of special attention from God. Job is going to be defending himself, saying that I did the best I could, basically. I was as faithful and upright as I could be. I did not have anything, there's nothing hidden to me. Like, there's no secret sinful side of me that no one knew about. But God has found some fault with me anyway, and has taken it upon himself to attack me for no apparent reason. That's going to be God's statement. And these three other guys are going to be trying to defend God by saying that God is faithful and just and only inflicts punishment on wicked people, which means you must be a wicked person. And they're going to basically go back and forth on that for 30 chapters. So that's essentially what the rest of the book of Job is about. And then a fourth guy shows up later on to sort of change the discussion and set the stage for God himself coming along and talking at the end. So these three guys in Job are going to have a roundabout argument that goes nowhere. And then another guy is going to come along and start to kind of shift the thinking. And after he's done talking, God's going to speak, and the book ends, basically. Now, I wanted to mention a couple things here about this opening chapter. Job's opening lament, before he gets into his defense of himself, which he'll be prompted to do by these guys indicating that Job himself was sinful, which is why these things are happening to him. His response to that will be to defend himself and then start asking God why God is being so mean to him, basically. But Job doesn't seem to be particularly upset here about losing his kids. One of the things that can really strike of modern readers of Job is the fate of these 10 people who died, and the servants. No one cares about the servants. No one cares about them. The fate of these 10 apparently young adult children of Job who died doesn't seem to merit special consideration from anyone in the story. Like, Job doesn't talk about them very much. The three friends, God doesn't mention them. It's like they kind of are the victims, and they're just there to get killed off, and everyone seems to move on like pretty heartlessly from them. But you have to remember that in Job's culture, I mentioned this earlier, I'm going to mention this again now. In Job's culture, the way you lived forever was to have lots of sons, was to have lots of descendants, was to make your name great through what your sons did. Okay? So Job's problem is not so much about losing his 10 kids. Okay? That's not really his problem. Not in the way that we might think it should be in today's culture. In our minds today, we would think, well, that should be his problem. That's the thing he should be mourning the most. Well, it really isn't. What Job is mourning, and this is what you get from his opening lament here, and even his opening statement about naked I came from the womb and naked I'll return. Job is lamenting that his life is now meaningless. His life is now purposeless. He might as well never have lived. He might as well have died in infancy, died in childbirth, never made it out of the womb. Okay, and the reason why that's what he's lamenting here. Like, Job's lament here in chapter 3 of Job is about now how purposeless his life has become. And the reason why he's lamenting that is because now it's as if he accomplished nothing. With all of his belongings gone and his children gone, he has nothing. That's where he goes back to the whole, I came from the womb naked, I'll go back there naked. So his lament is not so much about the loss of his adult children, as much as it is, well, now, like, my life is useless. Everything I've done in my life is now meaningless. I'm gonna go out of this world the same way I came in it. So I might as well have died as a baby and not experienced any of this. So that's his problem. Like, that is Job's. Before they get into the arguments, before the other guys start talking, for those 7 days that he was sitting there stewing over his problem, and then he starts speaking, like, that's what he's thinking about. Now, when they start talking to him, they're going to start indicating that he must have, or his kids at least, must have had some kind of hidden sin in his life which has brought this retributive justice about. And then that will put Job in a position of saying, no, that did not happen. God is just attacking me for no reason. So then it's going to start taking on that shape of the argument. That argument is going to start taking on that particular shape. But here at the beginning, Job's lament is that his life is now meaningless because he has nothing left behind. He has no legacy now. He is the same now as he was when he was born, so he might as well have died as a baby and never experienced any of this. That's his problem. That is the lament of Job. We might think he should express more sorrow for the deaths of his adult children. Maybe he should. Okay, the book seems remarkably callous towards those deaths. No one seems to care about them very much, not even God. I don't know. I mean, like it is pretty interesting, just how that gets kind of glossed over, and no one really seems to care. But Job does care, but he cares in the ancient context of, well, now my life is meaningless. With no one to carry on my name, and my possessions all scattered to the wind, I've accomplished nothing in life. I might as well have died as a child, or died in infancy, because I'm going to take out from life what I came in with, and everything I've done in the meantime is purposeless, meaningless, useless. So that is his lament. So next time we're going to get into the arguments. We're going to get into the cycle of speeches. And this is where the book loses steam. And I think most people today would not probably read this section of the book. But that's where we are now at the beginning, when Job first talks and before the cycle of speeches start.